Welcome back, everyone. This is German Grandmaster Georg Meier with another video on the Catalan. This will be our second look at what I consider the main line in the Catalan. After there are different possible move orders, but eventually we look at this position, which to me is the main line when black decides to take on c4. So in the last video I've talked quite a bit about this position, so if you're interested in the intricacies of why black is exactly taking at this point on c4, go back to the previous video. And there we covered queen takes c4, and the other big alternative is the move a4, not letting black expand on the queen side with b7, b5. Thus black has to go bishop d7 to get this bishop out. And what black is happy about is that he forced a concession in white abandoning the square b4, which could one day be reached by a black knight, for example, going from b8 to a6 and then b4 after playing a6, a5. So here normally white would recapture on c6. Black would go bishop c6, opposing the Catalan bishop on g2, and then two possible lines for white are bishop f4 or bishop g5. They lead to quite a tedious struggle where black has good chances to equalize. And I want to show what is my pet line in dealing with this system. And it's my pet line because every time I play it, I win, since I've never encountered an opponent who knew exactly what to do. And therefore, I also want to recommend it for the viewer's repertoire. When you feel that your opponent is not familiar with all the theory here, then this is a very good try. So first, before we go to rook d1, which is the move I recommend, let's discuss some alternatives still. For example, there is the move knight e5, which is met by bishop c6, takes, takes. Now I have to defend on d4 since I don't want to part with g2 bishop. e3, and black has time to play knight a5, defending the pawn on c4. Knight e2 is logical, but black is in time with his counterplay. The rook will oppose the queen on the c-file. The pawn on c5 will be recaptured, and eventually black is equalizing. And if we started, for example, with the move knight c3 to soon play e4, then knight c6 is very unpleasant. Normally the knight wouldn't go there, we would put the bishop on c6 as black, but now knight b4 can come with tempo, or even knight a5. And white normally wants to take on c4 when the knight goes to c6, so this just doesn't work. So after rook d1, of course knight c6 would be met by queen takes c4. So black has to continue with bishop c6. And now that the bishop has gone to c6, we go knight c3. And our plan is to play e4, after which the bishop on c6 will be very awkwardly placed. Always subject to an attack by knight e5, attacking the bishop, or d4, d5, which is a problem since the rook is opposing the queen on the opening d-file. So that's a lot of arrows. Here there are several options for black, and we will go through them one by one because this is the key position for my line. Quite often, our opponent will play a5 because it's kind of the natural route to get the knight out, a6, b4. But then white gets to carry out the whole plan, e4, knight a6, knight e5, before with tempo, queen e2. And here it's important to take stock for the first time. When black put his bishop on c6, he was banking on being able to exchange that bishop for the one on g2. But white has managed to keep all the pieces on the board while preserving a very strong center with this powerful pawn duo. And when you manage to keep all the pieces on the board, your space advantage will weigh very heavily. So let's see what this means in the coming moves. First of all, it's very difficult for black to connect the rooks, not to say impossible. Black went queen c8 to be able to put the rook on d8. I just doubled on d2. It's a game of mine that we are looking at. And eventually, with all the pieces in the game, I decided I will now recapture on c4. And you see that white's position is just fantastic. All the pieces are centrally placed. I do have the central pawns that control everything on the 5th rank that is of importance, and black's position is just completely cramped. And it would get easier to defend with every piece he could exchange, but there are no exchanges inside. So many grandmasters would call this a strategically winning position because it's just a matter of time until white turns on the screws and black's position collapses, since there is no counterplay to speak of. And white has all the space he wants to maneuver and generate an attack. So black went rook a6. Yeah, started to needle my opponent with bishop h3. Kind of looking at the queen, preparing d5. So naturally he removed the queen from the diagonal, but now bishop f4. Looking at this diagonal, having ideas of playing knight b5 and attacking on c7. So after bishop f4, black felt compelled to drive away my bishop, but this eternally weakens the black king. So I'm happy to go back, and soon I will carry out the push f2, f4, and then my pieces will slowly swarm the black king side. To b5, I did not get carried away. Organized my pieces there. f6 is a further weakening, and finally I decided to open up the position. Now let's just see how this concluded. Bishop d4, just going purely for coordination. Eventually it will lead to a decisive attack. And here bishop d7 is already the beginning of the end, since white can now pick up material when he wants to. But I didn't take yet on e8. I wanted to bring the knight to f5. k6, and here I should have actually finished the game by bishop e8 and then giving up the queen, since at the end I'm picking up the bishop on e7 and such an overwhelming material advantage and ongoing attack, I could resign. So you see that already after a5 and e4 the deal is sealed and white has a very big advantage. So instead of black would go knight bd7, again we go e4 here. Black tries to hold on to the extra pawn, but white explodes the position in the center immediately. And now, with a very strong move e5, exposes the lack of space again. Black doesn't manage to coordinate, and there's one way to sacrifice a piece with knight c5, but it's completely insufficient. After knight d4, bishop b7, I take, and I take on a8, and I just keep taking material. With the c6, knight d6, everything is working out in white's favor, and I will end up being a piece up. So at this point, instead of giving up a piece with knight c5, there is the move knight e4, but then white takes on d5. Knight cannot be tolerated there, and now the knight has to move again from c4, and there are big problems. Black cannot take back because we would win with a tactical operation. Rook takes d7, and then knight g5, and we are threatening mate on h7 and threatening the queen on a8. So here we see that all of white's activity got beautifully unloaded. So let's go back a few moves. So this is a very nice motive to keep in mind, this pawn break with d5, ed, e5, and then after knight takes d5, black is forced to make a major concession by giving up the c6 bishop, after which he can't hold it together anymore. So going back, there are two more sidelines. One is knight d5. Here white plays e4, and black again tries to defend the pawn on c4. After knight e5, bishop b7, rook b1. We will either win the pawn on b5, or there's the threat of knight c4, since in the end the bishop on b7 is unprotected. And one more move before I show you what is considered the best defense for black. There is bishop b4. bishop g5, h6, takes, and here another nice little motif, knight a2. And we are about to pick up the pawn on c4 now. After that, the knight will go back to c3, and we are ready to take over the center with e4. Well, black's pieces are kind of scattered around, and knight on b8 is far from making an impression. So instead of all these possible and, well, not entirely stupid moves, there is one solution that is very counterintuitive, and that's why most people who are not aware of the theory don't find it. It's the move bishop takes f3. It's very hard to imagine someone seeing this position for the first time coming to the conclusion to play this move. But the idea is very concrete. Now after knight c6, which attacks on d4, white has to make a concession. In turn, give up the bishop on c6, because after a move like e3, there is just knight a5, and we do not manage to win the pawn back on c4. The knight is also nicely defending on b7. Also can jump into b3. We can't really deal with this. So we're forced to take on c6. And here I'm in favor of the very interesting move a5. The idea is to bring the rook from a1 into the game and capture on c4. So not only do we get the rook into the game, but we start to pile up on the c-file if this works out. There are more weaknesses. So black needs to act quickly. One way is playing knight d5, after which rook f4 doesn't make much sense because there's knight b4. So here we would kind of change plan. Go knight e4, knight a4, queen b8, bishop d2. Since if we take right away, then queen b5 is awkward to meet. We don't want to exchange on b5 ourselves, and we're not yet ready to play rook c1 to support the queen. Therefore first bishop d2, queen b5, now rook dc1, and black cannot stop us from taking on c4 next, and we will look at these weaknesses. So after a5, black goes rook b8, rook a4. Black holds off the attack on a4 for a moment, but knight a2, and in the end we will manage to capture the pawn. Queen b8, queen c4, and if now queen b5, we will just capture, play bishop e3, and go back to a classic topic in the Catalan, trying to use black's weaknesses on the c-file. So after knight d5, rook c1, rook d8. Rook d8 is good because there's a rejoinder on rook c6 to go rook d6, but we drop back to c2, and this is a very nice maneuver since you see the rook was on c1, it went to c6, and now we have vacated the c1 square, and that's where the knight wants to go, c1, d3, and now he will look at the optimal squares. c5 is a great outpost to look at. a6, b4 will be controlled, also e5, and then we have a strategically superior position based on the weak c-pawn, and also in some lines the weak a6 pawn, and can slowly build up on that. So all in all, I think this concept starting with rook d1 is a very good chance to get a large advantage, which after my year-long experience in the Catalan, I cannot say of any other line facing this main line after dc4. I hope you liked this video. There is more on the Catalan, in total a series of 10 videos, so check out the others, and if you have any comments or questions, feel free to post.